morning and welcome to our webinar. The title of the webinar is Reduce, Reuse, and Recycling Assembly Equipment. My name is Ed Stockline. I'm the head of sales here at Promess Incorporated in Brighton, Michigan.
And hi, I'm Travis. I'm an account and territory manager here at Promess.
So we're going to talk about a couple different or three different topics today. The main one, or the first one, is going to be what's the point of recycling equipment? Next will be compounding your ROI with robust equipment. And then the third one is how you can, or how your spare parts can be used to work for you instead of collecting dust. So recycling can have kind of a bad connotation. Reuse, repurpose, refurbish are all probably better terms for it. But the idea is it's fairly similar. And here we're not trying to tear apart a assembly line and rebuild and reconfigure all of those same parts, reuse 100% of the items on an assembly line, but it's actually to take some of those key components like robots, presses, nut runners, things like that, and repurpose them for your next project. But in order to do that, you have to have robust enough systems to be able to even consider repurposing. So Travis, what's our idea of a robust system?
For us, an idea of a robust system is something that will last. The life cycle of it is going to be throughout your entire project. It's built to last and sustain everything you need it to do. An idea of this is when we compare our system to a desk, something that you could buy from IKEA, something that's pretty cheaply manufactured, and once you put it up, it'll do the job you need it to do for a short time, but then you'll have another use for the desk and you'll have to take it apart and move it. And that's when you learn, when you went the cheaper route, it falls apart easily. And now you don't have a desk, you have to go out and buy a whole new desk. And compared to buying a nice wooden desk that was built to last, you can take it apart, move it, set it up in your new station, and now you have a working desk. So when we think of robustness, we think of something that has the flexibility to move forward with a new project and still last to do the projects that you need it to do.
So what are some things that we would want to consider when repurposing equipment?
So I think the first thing that we want to talk about is the age of the current system. I think that's the first discussion that we would need to have is how old is your system? What kind of technology is it using? How many cycles has it ran? How many parts have you made? With all the reintroductions of new Windows operating software, we need to make sure that it can communicate on that platform with any new technology.
Yeah, that's pretty important to consider because when we start talking about, say, a Promess system that might be 10 or 15 or 20 years old, the technology that was used is vastly different, 20 years ago than it is today. So that's definitely something to consider. What about crashes on a system?
Yeah, crashes on a system can be pretty devastating because that sudden impact of the force of the mechanics really isn't something that it's designed to withstand. So it's something when you think about how many crashes have happened over the life cycle of maybe 20 years, it's not a bad idea to get it in for refurbishing so that we can have engineers go through it and make sure all of your components are working correctly.
Yeah. Another thing to point out with that is, you have a system that lasts a really long time. There's a lot of changeover over, say, when you're talking in terms of a company and a project using that same system for that long, you have different engineering, you have different maintenance personnel. There's a lot of different variables that come into play when you're talking about, say, a system that lasts for 10 or 15 years.
Right.
And then the preventative maintenance too, right?
Yeah, you want to make sure you're getting your quarterly greasing and keeping up with calibration. That's important to make sure that your system's going to last. As we're talking about reusing the equipment, what kind of impacts are we going to face when we have to reprogram the machine?
Yeah, so reprogramming is obviously a huge thing. So you are going to have some initial costs even if you're repurposing equipment that you currently own, right? So upgrading to new drives, motors, software, that type of thing, but reprogramming. So we have fairly simple programming, so it doesn't really take a whole lot to, say, write a program for a similar part to do the same thing that the old system did. But it's just a lot of the technological stuff like we mentioned before.
Yeah, yeah. It's a nice step-based program that you can probably copy a lot of the same stuff from. Yeah.
Yep. Or completely write a new program for something that is completely unrelated. That's our systems have the flexibility to do that. So what does it mean for your company when you invest in a robust system?
It means that you're getting something that you know is going to work. A big idea behind that is downtime. Is when you start to plan on downtime with a robust system. It always happens. How quickly can you troubleshoot it, and how quickly can you replace what needs to be replaced? And if you're going with something that is not robust, you'll start fighting these issues of replacing motors, belts, cables, and all these things compound into more problems.
Right. And changing them out more often too, right?
Yep.
So having a robust system means less maintenance over the life of the system. It means less cost. You know, a typical automotive program that might run 7 to 10 years, if you don't have a robust system, or you have, say, an undersized electric actuator, you might be replacing that 5 or 6 times in a 10-year period versus just once with or just the initial purchase with a system that is robust.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that kind of leads into our next discussion, which is compounding our ROI with robust equipment. So we're talking a little bit about taking a system that is used on a project. So there's an initial capital purchase and using it for the life of that project, but then taking that same system and repurposing it for the next project.
Yeah.
So what effect does that have on, say, ROI?
So ROI is the return on interest, and so the main thing that you want to focus on, or return on investment. The main thing that everyone's going to focus on is that initial cost. Is so that you have to make up your initial investment first, and then you start getting your return. So that the initial cost is always the main discussion. Why does this cost more, and is this going to potentially save us money over the life of the program?
Yeah. So even though there is usually a cost associated with reusing the equipment, typically it's much less, usually just a fraction of the cost of what a new system would be. And then some time investment in either reprogramming or getting new tooling and fixturing set up, that type of thing.
You're basically bringing it into the current technology. That's the objective.
Yep, exactly. So one thing to consider with that is kind of your break-even date, right? So most of our customers, 2 to 4 years is pretty standard for their break-even on our equipment. So I guess we can draw a little graph of how that is affected. Is that good, Ben?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So down here we have time, and up here we have cost. So if we're looking at, say, a period of 4 years, initially the initial cost of the system is going to be, say somewhere in this range. With our systems, at least, the cost of maintenance is just a couple squirts of grease every quarter, every 250,000 cycles, a yearly calibration, which is fairly minimal for a high volume production. So you would see kind of a curve like this over the years. So that may include some spare parts here and there, whatever you need to do to run the system. The other line that we draw on here is kind of your profit, right? So theoretical profit. Have something like this where your break-even period is 2-3 years, somewhere in there. If you were to, say, use that system over again, you might actually, for your second project, after that initial project is over, you don't have to rebuy that system at the initial new cost. You might have just a fraction of the cost, somewhere down here, somewhere here, where your break-even point is actually much sooner than on your second project than it would be on the first. And that's kind of where that compounding ROI comes in. You've already spent the money on the initial capital equipment. If you're looking at something, say, over the life of 20 years, especially for equipment in high volume production, that can be a very valuable tool for the engineers that have to, say, put on multiple projects over their career at a facility.
So you would also see the same maintenance plan as you talk about your costs, because you can already predict this a lot better as you've already gone through the first project.
Yep. So depending on whatever this cost is, if you use a press that is even somewhat oversized for the application, right? So maybe you're only using 50% of the capacity of the press. You might only put minimal wear and tear, and that's where you're going to really lower the second project's investment. Now, if you got a high volume, say automotive application or something where you're doing 1 million cycles a year, the wear and tear on the mechanics might be a little bit higher, and your second project initial investment will be a little bit greater, because you have to dive into the mechanics and make sure that everything is hunky-dory.
Yeah, I think that's an important discussion too, as we talked earlier about considering when we're repurposing, is how much wear and tear are you putting on your components. A certain size system, if you're going to max capacity repetitively, it works a lot harder than using something at 10% of load.
Yeah. Obviously, that is a simple ROI calculation too. So that would be more indicative of like an annual percentage of like 10 or 11%, which is fairly typical in our industry. Obviously, there's a lot of other variables in that you have to consider: the whole line, the whole project, what it costs, those types of things as well. So that is just kind of a simplification of that too.
So you're talking about a machine that you've used over 20 years in a project, and so when you have something that long, you tend to buy spare parts. And so how do we incorporate spare parts to create an ROI?
Yeah. We definitely have to have a conversation about spare parts. That's something that's fairly important. Everybody asks it as they're looking at, say, a capital purchase of any magnitude, right? So what's one way that we've seen our customers use their spare parts budget effectively?
The best way that I've seen it is they actually put it into a workstation. It's an offline station right next to the assembly line, and it's a mimic of some of the presses they have on there. And so that they can use that as something maybe for increased capacity. They have more parts coming in, they can remove a bottleneck. They can use it for future projects as they're starting to research and develop it. A small price of tooling and fixturing, they can figure out what kind of forces are needed and pre-write programs. I think that's been the best way that I've seen that used.
Yeah, I think one of the things to point out, for those of you that aren't familiar with who or what our workstation is, it's essentially a mostly complete workstation or station that has a press, a C-frame, or a 4-post frame. Comes with an electrical cabinet. It's basically ready to be powered up and tooled up. So some of our customers that are a little bit more proactive, they may have, say, 5 presses on their assembly line of a particular size, and then they'll buy a workstation that is an offline workstation, like Travis was mentioning, to where they can do stuff off to the side instead of buying spare parts and just putting them on the shelf, which is probably 2/3 of the cost of, say, a workstation or something. You can actually put those spare parts to work. And then when you do have a problem or do have an issue where you need to do some troubleshooting or swapping out parts, you're not taking down, say, other parts of the line to get that one station up and running. You're actually taking your spare parts on your workstation technically and bringing them to the production line.
Yeah, you have a functioning press right there that you can use. You know the cables work, you know the motor works, you know.
Yeah.
As you start to swap things, it just makes troubleshooting a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those of you that are higher level and more strategic in how you're trying to use your capital equipment budgets and things like that, you can actually use that workstation in an R&D fashion. So put that workstation in a lab, have your R&D team and your advanced engineering team actually use it for research and development, and then use those parts if production ever needs them, if they're the same, if it's the same size press. And that's kind of a valuable thing that we don't really talk about a lot, is our systems smart enough to be used in an R&D environment like that, but also robust enough to use in the production environment. So I always like to point that out too.
You could also use it as a training method. So you can bring a newer engineer or a newer operator in, and they can interface with the system and learn how to use it offline. So you're not interfering with running production.
Yep, that's another way that our customers have used it, where they purchase the workstation that's the same size as their production units for their training centers. So they have basically a full workstation, production ready press, one to learn on, so you don't have to stop the line to learn how to program a system or have to travel to go and get training. But you can also use that as your spare parts backup too.
Yeah. I think when you're purchasing something that's designed to last that long, and then you get spare parts for it, finding a use for it is very important.
Yeah, and it's just with a robust system, or a system that does have, say, the safety factors that we do, it doesn't make sense to just buy parts and put them on the shelf, because you may never use a press cylinder that you buy as a spare part with our system. So it's something to consider when you're initially looking at any equipment purchase, but presses in particular. There's a few ways to look at the sizing of them. One of them being like the weight capacity of them, right? So if you're looking at different presses, usually the one that weighs more is going to be that more robust, that more solid system.
Yeah, so if you're comparing two of the same size, if one is half the weight of the other, the company with the heavier press isn't just adding extra weight for no reason. Steel is expensive, so adding that weight is for a reason, and it's for increased safety factors to make sure it can withstand the forces and that you're using.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh yeah, on time. Doing all right. So I think we'll go to some questions. If you do have any questions, there's a chat that you can, or a form that you can fill out to send us some questions. So what if my workstation is not the right size for a future project? I think the easiest answer to that is we can find that out. So Promess has what we call our process development center, where we have a bunch of workstations with different size presses on it. We can do the verification for you, or you can bring parts up to our lab to actually test them and see. It could be that you don't know the right size just initially, or maybe you try and press some parts yourself and maybe the press is too small, right? So we can help at least determine what the right size press is, and help you figure out how that fits into your project planning.
And we use similar components for almost all of our stations. So if you're looking at an upgrade, we do that. Sometimes it's just a motor that could create more power that will help out. So that will make, if you do need more, if you already have a workstation, you need to upgrade it, we do have those options available, and we can always start that discussion.
Yeah. So we have, I think, 5 different size workstations, but each of those supports 3 to 4 different sizes of presses. So say you start out with a 5 kilonewton press and you need a 8 kilonewton press. It's just a couple mechanical components and maybe a couple electronics that need to be swapped out in order to upgrade the size without having to swap out the whole station or buy a brand new station.
Right.
What's the lead times for a standard workstation?
Our current lead times are 12 to 14 weeks for a standard workstation.
Yep. Yeah, there is a lot of lead time woes right now. We're holding true to our same 12 to 14 weeks. It's the way of the world right now. So yeah, if you need something quick, we even have a lot of this stock on hand. So there may be something that we could expedite if you're really in a bind.
Yeah. How quick are your turnaround times for spare parts?
That probably really depends on the press size. Most of the stuff that we have is on the shelf.
Yeah.
If we don't have it on the shelf, it's probably on the way here.
Yeah.
We have a massive amount of inventory to support all of our customers across the world that run 24/7. So our goal for all of our customers is minimal downtime. We do have certain long lead items that obviously you probably want to build into your spare parts plan, but there's a lot of components that really we keep in stock all the time too. So that reduces the risk and the need for you to have that on your own shelf.
Yeah, we just had that happen today. Someone needed a replacement part. We were able to get a hold of them, figure out what they needed, and they should have it tomorrow. So sometimes as short as a day of, we can create a turnaround.
You know, I've loaded a press into the back of a vehicle on more than one occasion to have same day stuff. So yeah, just depends on what you need, but give us a call if you do need something.
Yeah.
So that's all it looks like for questions. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hopefully that was a little bit insightful. Just having a conversation about different ways to use the press, different ways to benefit from that initial capital purchase. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to us, sales@promessinc.com, promess@promessinc.com, our email addresses, or stop on our website, put in a web submission, we'll get back to you. Join us on our next webinar on April 20th for a deeper discussion about choosing workstations in your assembly. Stay tuned for the invite. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.